ever look up into the night sky and just dreamt about becoming an astronaut? Like when we were young, we all dreamt about becoming astronauts, becoming the president, or just becoming someone famous. Then we grew up and found out how hard life is. Well, since our childhood, we have made a great technological advancement that has put us in a time where science fiction seems more of a reality. Well, back in 1969, we did something that was only considered as science fiction and impossible. We landed on the moon. Now, years later, just talk about sending the first people up into Mars. So I thought you guys should know more about the moon landing, since that seems more of a stepping stone to what we're doing now. Based on the amount of research that I've conducted, I feel like I'll be a credible source to talk about the moon landing. And for this speech, I plan on informing you about the moon landing as well as some of the events that led up to it. I'll first talk about Sputnik, as it was the first satellite to enter space. I'll talk about the space race and some of the most memorable competitions that were held through it. And finally, I'll be talking about the moon landing. Alright, so the first topic I want to talk about is Sputnik. Now, Sputnik, when first launched, created controversy all over the world. And to quote Steve Gardner, NASA's web curator, October 10, 2007, online article, Sputnik and the Dawn of the Space Age. History changed on October 4, 1957, when the Soviet Union successfully launched Sputnik 1. Now, when Sputnik first reached space, it created a beeping noise that was heard on the radio. People didn't know what it was, why it was happening, or where it was coming from, and when they found out, they started to panic. This was during the Cold War era, and when people found out that it was because Russia managed to send up a satellite up into space, and they panicked because now they believed that they had the power to send nuclear warheads from Russia to the United States. Now Sputnik's primary mission was just to send a signal from space to Earth, which it did. It was roughly the size of a beach ball and weighed 184 pounds, and only lasted 98 minutes in space before it was pulled back into Earth from its gravitational pull and it burnt up in the atmosphere. Right now that I've talked to you guys about Sputnik, I want to now move on and start talking about the space race. So first, what exactly was the space race? Well, it was a set of competition. There were three memorable competitions out through it. The first one was getting the first satellite up into space, which Russia won when they launched Sputnik. And then the United States got involved in that race when January 31st, 1958 was our successful launch of Explorer 1. Now, even afterwards, they continued to send out satellites into space. Some managed to orbit the Earth, others managed to orbit the Moon, and others went beyond that and orbited or crashed into other planets. Now, the second most memorable competition was getting the first man into space, and we lost that in April 12, 1961, when Yuri Gagarin, that's this guy right here, it's a black and white and colored picture, and that's Explorer 1 on the far side. When he managed to get into space, and to get a quote from Lola Taylor Reds and Robert Roy Britt's news article, Yuri Gagarin, first man in space, the greatest moment in flight. His 108-minute flight gave him a permanent place in the history books as the first man in space. Now, even though he already claimed that title of being the first man in space, people continued to go, and with each new launch, they were actually able to stay up there for a longer period of time. And looking at today, we can see that people live up in the International Space Station for months at a time. Alright, well, now that I've talked to you guys about two of the memorable competitions that were held during the space race, I want to move on and start talking about the moon landing, which was actually the third competition held during the space race. Now, when Kennedy was still in office, he stressed the importance of reaching the moon first. In his special message to the Congress on urgent national needs in May 25th, 1961. In that speech, he states, "First, I believe this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth." Sadly, he was unable to see that event because he was assassinated a couple of years later. But even without Kennedy, we still managed to reach his goal of reaching the moon within 10 years, because in July 16, 1961, Apollo 11 launched. And in it, naming them from left to right, was Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Edwin Buzz Aldrin. Now, they launched in July 16, 1969, and actually landed on the moon on July 20th, 1969. We all know Neil Armstrong's famous words when he first stepped onto the moon: "There's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Those were the words that he said as he walked on the moon. He was then followed by Edwin Buzz Aldrin, who was the second person to ever walk on the moon, while Michael Collins stayed in the command module as he served as a relay between the two men on the moon and the people of Earth. And then when it was time for them to return back into Earth, they landed in the Pacific Ocean, where they were later retrieved by the Navy ship, the USS Hornet. Alright, now that I think it's time for me to start wrapping things up. So, I've just informed you about the moon landing and some of the events that led up to it. I first talked about Sputnik, which was the first satellite to ever go into space. I talked about what the space race was and some of the memorable competitions that were held during it, and also Yuri Gagarin, the first man to enter space. And then finally, I talked about the moon landing. Now, in 1969, the first man was able to walk on the moon. Now, it is rumored that in the year 2030, just 61 years after they accomplished that, we'll be sending the first people up into Mars.